I just want to say that Spectora has something very exciting going on, and it's that we've just launched our community called the Spectora HQ. Essentially, what this is it's a new platform. We've had a Facebook group in the past, we still have a Facebook group, but we wanted something that was a bit more comprehensive to bring together a place that everyone can like learn, grow, access resources. We have like Spector Academy and the Growth Hub and like replays of these office hours all in one place. And then also have a forum similar to Facebook where like y'all can talk to each other, get to know each other, build a bit of community in an industry that can be lonely. So I just want to give a quick shout out, and I'm putting a link in the chat right now to join. If you're a Spectora member, you should have gotten an email about this, but if not, you can just go to that link in the chat, log in with your Spectora account. So that's all I have to get out of the way. Anything you want to add there, Kevin?
Yes, I have lots of thoughts about this, but I'll try to keep them condensed. I was just writing a message in the Facebook user group this morning, actually, to just acknowledge that we're all used to using what we're using, right? Whether it's Facebook, Instagram, whatever social media platform, they're meant to be easy to use. There comes a time, I think, for every community and business where you do outgrow these tools, and I want to acknowledge that it served a great purpose and will continue to. But there's just more organization. There's more value we can add. There's ways we can organize groups and connections. There's so much more we can do on our new platform that we're creating and to serve you guys better. So I say be open-minded to it, check it out, see it for the things it'll add for you and for everyone in the community. And there'll be a little bit of a learning curve, but that's with anything new.
Totally. And I do think something else that this new community space we have kind of solves is I've heard from a lot of inspectors actually who are like, I don't want to be on Facebook because, Facebook is Facebook, but I do feel like I'm missing out from the Facebook group. So if that sounds like you, this is also a space for you. Again, it's like not a social media replacement. It's just a much better way to reach us, reach each other, build community, access all of our resources, and not have to go around to like a million different platforms. So with that out of the way, I don't want to waste too much time. We're talking about metrics and tracking success today. So Kevin and I are going to cover, first of all, like why this is important, why you'll see an acronym KYN, we'll get into it. And then just a couple key metrics to definitely track, especially if you're relatively new to this and want to understand and have great insight into your business and your data. We're just running through some basics. So some of this may sound familiar. If it's not, we're going to start pretty basic and just teach you how to do this. Then we're going to end with just a little chat on bringing it all together and like the big impact of this. So that started. Let's talk about this for a minute. KYN, know your numbers. I believe that's an acronym that I got from you, Kevin, and that you say all the time. I know you're a big data numbers guy. So do you want to talk a little bit about like why this is so important for home inspectors and why we're giving this office hours in general today?
Yes. So we're going to start off with me having a little empathy for everyone here. So if you're here, you were vaguely interested in metrics and numbers, right? And as a business owner, some of you are new business owners. This doesn't happen right away. So I want to acknowledge and have empathy for everyone here that when you're starting off, this is one of the hardest things to pay attention to when all you're trying to do is get business and survive and stay afloat. And so in the early days of Spectora, we did not know our numbers. We just wanted to talk to more inspectors and learn more about your guys' needs to build better software. But it's a journey. So I want to say, like, you're not going to do all this right away. You're not going to have this down pat. But it's a mindset and a mentality. And the earlier you can do it in your journey, the better. But we're not saying you have to have all this down on day one. And if you're a couple years in, this might be a good kick in the pants to be like, okay, it's time to sit down with these spreadsheets and get to know my numbers. It just makes for better informed business decisions.
Totally. And I think like if, we're both kind of nerds about this stuff, I love being able to track things. I also understand this is like not the sexiest topic. It can be kind of boring. So thank you to everyone who's tuning in because it is important. And I think like any new inspectors here with us, one of the reasons we think this is not just important, but maybe making your life easier is backfilling data can kind of suck. I don't want to deter anyone who hasn't, might be a little further along in their inspection company, hasn't tracked anything yet. It's easy. You can get started. But yeah, if you start doing this now as you're building your business for any newer inspectors we have here, it'll be so nice to like see that and be able to understand that. in the future years and not having to go and look back and see how you did year over year.
One other comment on that, Olivia, and I think it keeps you honest as a business owner, and it keeps anyone honest. Like Olivia tracks so many metrics when it comes to Spectora's metrics and marketing, and her and I talk about data all the time, and it tells the story as opposed to how we feel day to day, because you may feel great or you may feel terrible, but the numbers will even you out and give you a good balance.
Absolutely. Well said. I super quick, I think one of the other big reasons we're talking about this is that a while ago, Kevin, you had Aaron Guyton on your podcast. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that episode. And just, I know for me at least, that was like one of the most impactful episodes of Spector Spotlight that I think you've ever done. So I wanted to like share this quote and talk about how she works with tons, I think like about 100 inspection companies, and said that the majority of inspectors she works with, no matter where they're at in building their business, don't really know like metrics like market share and stuff. So do you want to share a little bit about just that conversation and what that was like?
Yeah, so I highly recommend you watch the YouTube version. So if you guys go to YouTube and search Spector Spotlight, Aaron Guyton, or episode 106, you'll find that. If you don't know what IEB is, it's a mastermind and coaching group, and it skews a little more experienced and multi-inspector, and even up to companies that have 50, 60, 70 inspectors. So you all should feel better about the fact if you don't know your numbers, because a lot of these business owners did not. And they some of them, she's constantly teaching members of IEB to learn their metrics, to know their numbers. And so she said it was one of the biggest blockers to people growing and becoming successful. And she has an MBA. She's a business person. She knows her accounting. She knows she could read balance sheets. She is sharp. And so to hear that from her, to say, this is one of the biggest barriers to companies really breaking out and reaching their full potential, was pretty impactful. But I don't want to spoil it. Go listen to the whole episode. I think you guys will learn a lot.
Yeah, it's fantastic. She's probably going to, quite honestly, not to put us down, phrase a lot of this better than we ever could, just because she does this specifically with home inspectors every single day. So it's worth a watch. But yeah, with that, I just think this is so important. And, I think we've seen, and Kevin, you can probably speak more to this than I have, like just so much growing up within our industry within the past couple of years. And, as the industry consolidates a little bit, as companies grow, like this is ever more important, whether you are looking to acquire, whether you're getting acquired, or whether you're just running your own business, running the mill. It's all important. So yeah, with that said, let's actually get into it. I think a couple things that's important, like why do we care about our metrics? I know for me, I have a really hard time caring about it unless I can see a very tangible result. So I always like to break things down like this. Number one, and Kevin kind of already touched on this, but like informed decision making. So if you can use your metrics that you track to make data-driven decisions, I like to refer to it as like not driving a car blind. Like you are making decisions based on things you have tracked, and therefore you're very informed. Making choices basically based on facts rather than assumptions. That's like super important, right? Because like Kevin said, it's really easy to think that things maybe shook out one way, and when you're actually looking at the numbers, it's like, oh, that's not quite true, and it can make a big difference in your business. I think number two that's really important, and this might seem like a no-brainer, it kind of is, but like performance monitoring and knowing where you can improve. So if you're able to track key metrics about your business, A, you have like a benchmark. B, it makes goal setting really easily because you know where you are, and you can strategically say, okay, I'm just going to throw this out here. This isn't one we're talking about today, but like I currently work with 4 realtors. I was able to build those relationships over the course of like 3 months. In the next 6 months, I want to be able to double that to 8 realtors, whatever. You'll be able to make decisions like that and set goals based on actual data. Then lastly is just compare performance against industry standards and against your local competitors. Like I think, especially in an industry that's a bit more solitary and you don't necessarily always have a manager giving you feedback, like it's hard to know if you're successful. And so that's why we really encourage looking at these numbers, understanding what they mean, and knowing the numbers of your business, because it's a great way to benchmark. Before I move on, do you have anything to add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the goal setting one I want to touch on, because anyone that has set a goal before, or if your kids play sports or if you've played sports, you set a goal, you try to make it ambitious, slightly out of reach, and then you drive towards that. And without having your numbers, you're kind of just creating them out of thin air, and you don't know if you're pushing yourself. You don't know um, where you are to your peers with what Olivia said. And so I would say, at a bare minimum, setting your 1, maybe 2, 3 year goals as a business is something I wish I would have done sooner with Spectora, and it's all rooted in the metrics. And then the questions I always get from inspectors is like, oh, what does the average multi do? How many inspections a month are they doing? Hey, as a new inspector, is 50 in the first year good in my state, in my region, in comparable cities? So all of this is stuff we're going to do a lot more with in Spectora HQ, and our industry report that Olivia has a big hand in putting out each year gives you guys a lot of data, but it almost means nothing if you're like, where do I compare to the averages? And so I want to wrap your heads around saying, know your numbers, and then we will help and supplement with industry statistics.
Totally. And by the way, since you brought it up, Kevin, if any of you want to check out the industry snapshot, I can try and find that URL and pull it up. But if you just Google Spectora industry snapshot, should be able to find it. It's just the report we put out about the state of the home inspection industry each year. So thank you for tying that all together. And yeah, very important point. I think also just the last reason why we care about metrics is like resource optimization. So that sounds very buzzwordy, but essentially, like if you know, for example, how much you're spending on marketing and then how much you're making from that marketing spend, like what your actual profit is, knowing those metrics and tracking them is huge, because you're able to say, okay, investing in SEO really worked well for me. Spending on like advertisements like Yelp, for example, I didn't make any money off of that for a year, so probably time to sunset that. And being able to make decisions like that by tracking key metrics is, again, super important when you're growing a business. So yeah, really just like it's so important to being able to understand what's worth investment, what's maybe not worth investment, and then identify like opportunities where you can save cost.
This will give you guys a lot of confidence in what you're doing every day, instead of that trust me, I know that feeling of just guessing and trying things out and then hoping they work. But if you get 10 inspections from the beginning, it's nice to know where at least 6, 7, or 8 of those came from, because then you can directly go there and keep using that as a source of leads. You just don't want to be shooting in the dark.
Totally. Yeah, very well said. Super quickly before we move on, I just want to say, like, anyone who's just joining, feel free to put questions in the chat, say where you're from, let us know how long you've been in business so we know who's tuning in with us, can give you guys the best guidance possible throughout this office hours. But we always answer questions at the end. Sometimes we answer them in the middle. So please pop those in wherever you're watching from, just in the comments, and we'll get to them. All right, so with that said, let's actually dive into some metrics you can track. And we're going to start with what I think is the most basic one, is number of inspections. I usually hear inspectors tracking this per month, which I think makes sense. So it's exactly what it sounds like. Total number of inspections completed each month. And basically, I think what this indicates about your business, pretty obvious, but like activity shows potential for growth, and it's really important to keep track of. So let's talk about this. If all of you are Spectora users, if you're not, you can become one. But for anyone who is currently on Spectora, you can track your number of inspections per month actually just right in the metrics tab of your Spectora profile. So if you go to your dashboard, click on metrics, you should see a graph with inspections like this. And as you can see, it's broken down by month. And then if you are a Spectora user and completing inspections for multiple years, you get those lines on top of each other, and you can see how you're doing in different months year over year. Yeah, so that one's very self-explanatory as far as tracking. But I do want to talk about a little bit about how you can like use this to actually inform business decisions and grow. So first of all, it's just kind of cool to see, especially I imagine as a new inspector building your business, seeing that number hopefully go up month over month, to where I, sometimes will be helping people out with their Spectora accounts, and you can just go in and like see the progression from like, okay, 1 or 2 inspections a month to like literally like 30, 40, 50, however many they're doing. So it's cool. It's also a great way to like analyze success of marketing efforts. So we'll talk about this more, but like a lot of what understanding your metrics is putting them together. So for example, if you went and visited like a ton of open houses, for example, in April, and then in May, you see your number of inspections double. Like that's a pretty good indicator that your marketing efforts have been successful there. Then again, like if you're looking, the real estate market is pretty seasonal as a whole. I think what we've seen, and Kevin, I don't know if you can talk more to this, but like the real estate market is so variable by each individual market, like what state you're in, what city you're in, all of that. So, and there's not always like excellent data on what that looks like, or maybe you don't know how to find it. So you can actually identify like seasonality in your home inspections by keeping track of this, like for a year, 2 years, which is pretty cool, which can help you like as you grow, if you're larger, like manage staffing needs, know when you might need to hire help versus when you're probably good as one-man shop if that's where you are. And then lastly, it's great for revenue forecasting and financial planning, because if you can track this over the course of growing your business and know when it's slower, when it's busier, what months you're generally doing the most inspections, about how many inspections you're doing per month generally, that's huge for being able to understand what you're going to make from your business and how you can plan best. Do you have anything to add there, just specifically on like the impact? I feel like this one just seems so basic, and it kind of is, but it's so hugely important to know, I think.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're spending time on it because the most basic stats sometimes are the ones you need to stare at the most until you know them like the back of your hand. And it's also so you can stay in tune with how you're feeling as your volume ramps up. Because if you're aware of how many inspections you're doing per week, per month, per quarter, as you grow and the further along you get, the more important those stats get. Because guess what? You're going to need to know when to hire someday. And for all you solo operators here, I want you to know that break point when to hire. And you can only know that by knowing how taxed you are, how much money you're making per inspection, how many inspections you're doing. We're going to get into more of that, but a lot of this is getting ahead of the bottlenecks that we've seen over many years of seeing companies grow.
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for saying that. And we just had to touch on this one because, yeah, well, it's basic. Sometimes those are the ones that, I don't know, for me, it's like I tend to gloss over them because I'm like, it's so basic, I don't really need to think about that. Whereas, like, obviously, it is important. So number 2 is revenue per inspection. So basically what this is and what you're actually going to track is just the average revenue earned from each inspection. And this is a super helpful metric to track because it can help you set your pricing, first of all, and understand your profitability. And then it also, again, as a lot of these metrics do, plays a large role in financial planning and forecasting. So this is another one that you can actually calculate and track straight in Spectora. So you're going to look at 2 different parts of your metrics tab. You can see, again, like inspections per month that we just talked about and your revenue. And then how you'll calculate this is total your monthly revenue for each given month, which is here, and then divide by that number of inspections. Bam, you have your average revenue per inspection. If you wanted to take this a step further, because every time we share average revenue per inspection for an inspector, I always get someone emailing me or commenting, if I post something on Spectora's social media saying, that's actually not the revenue I'm bringing home. That's just like the total number, like how much my inspection is. And that is a great point, and it's absolutely true. So you can actually calculate your profit per inspection, your PPI, which basically takes all of your expenses and costs into account, and then you can calculate by subtracting the cost for an inspection by your revenue per inspection. That's how you know how you're profiting. Don't want to get too into that because that will probably look a little different for every company based on your spend. But if you want to know that view of like how much you're making per inspection, you can always figure out how to do that. Just Google how to calculate cost or profit per inspection, and there should be a resource that comes up. Then lastly, I think, again, like how to use this data, how is this actually impactful and helpful? I think number 1 is comparing your RPI to like industry standards and to your local markets. So you can see, okay, average inspection price tag was like $351. National average is like $470. If you're there, not necessarily anything wrong with being like cheaper, and that can depend on your local market, but it might be a good indicator that you haven't raised your prices or you're starting really low, that you could probably raise your prices and still be competitive. So learnings like that. B, like very related, is like understanding how competitive your pricing is important, because if you are on the lower side, that's definitely something you can use as a value prop. And if you're on the higher side and you know you're on the higher side of what your market is, you can do something really great and explain why. With Spectora, we know as far as home inspection software options go, we might not be the cheapest on the market, but we believe in the quality of our product, right? We know that the average that you might spend on Spectora is more than you might spend on another competitor, but it's going to be very worth it. So if you're looking at your inspection price and seeing, I'm like my average inspection price or the revenue I'm bringing home, if people are spending $600-700 on me, and that's because my price is high, you can be able to justify it. And sometimes if your revenue per inspection is high, that's not just from the base price of your inspection, that's because you're offering ancillary services, which is another way you can explain value. So that was a long spiel, but I think it's important. And then just along that note, like making sure you're keeping pace with industry growth. Again, we've seen like such small growth in the average revenue per inspection over the past like 20 years when real estate has exploded. So making sure that you're understanding like how much you're making and how that's growing and changing year over year relative to like the rest of the real estate market, that's an important insight to have. Kevin, do you have anything to add there? I see you like nodding along.
Yeah, I want to touch on the price piece of knowing what you're charging relative to your local market, because buyers and agents are more aware about pricing more than ever because home prices are at all-time highs in a lot of markets, right? In 7% mortgage rates, people are very cautious and understand they have to look at every dollar spent. And so if you're able to speak to where you sit in your market and the value you're able to provide, it just shows that you are really dialed in. And you can be a brand new inspector and speak to these things because we have those averages and industry standards to share with you guys. And so use that as an advantage, use that as a talking point. And when you can speak to an agent on that level, I believe your chances of winning them over go way up, because if someone had spoken to me like that, I would be like, wow, they know exactly what they're providing for the value. And you get ahead of price objections because you're going to get price objections, right? Especially if you're new and you want to move up market a little quicker, you're going to get price objections. This gets ahead of them. So I think knowing your revenue per inspection might be the most important one.
Absolutely. And then just beyond that, because, revenue is not perfectly equal to price, like knowing how much you bring home on average per inspection, especially if you offer ancillary services, plan on ancillary services, it's really important to know how much revenue you are averaging, so you can adjust pricing and understand like the actual value you get for every inspection. Then B, this is going to be a bullet point everywhere, but revenue forecasting and financial planning, like knowing how much revenue you make per inspection is super important in determining what you can spend on other things like marketing, what you'll actually take home, all that good stuff. All right, number 3, market share. So if anyone doesn't know what market share is, I apologize. I never want anyone to feel like I'm like talking down to you when I explain anything like this. I always like to go over definitions and basics because I've been a part of like webinars or something where someone says a term and I'm like, what does that even mean? So that's why we're doing all the definitions. But market share is essentially the percentage of inspections that you and your business conduct relative to the total available number of inspections on the market. So if you're wondering why the picture we've chosen for this slide is a pie, it's because essentially like how big is your slice of the pie in your local market inspections. And market share is pretty important because it essentially measures your competitiveness in your market and your growth potential in your market. How to calculate and track this one. This one is not one we have available within Spectora, but there is a really easy equation and it's pretty easy to get the data you need. So I have the formula up here, just take a screenshot if you need it, but essentially your market share equals your number of inspections in a given time period. So let's say you did, 10 inspections in a month. And then you divide that by the total inspections available in your market in the same period. So let's say you're dividing that by 100 inspections per month, and then you multiply that number times 100. That's how you get your market share. The biggest question I always get when we talk about market share is like, how do I find out how many available inspections there are in my market? So I would say like Redfin has data for most cities. So if you just Google like Redfin home sales, you'll get a breakdown of how many home sales occurred within a given month. And now that's not like the perfect number, because not every home sale comes with a home inspection and yada yada, but it's a pretty good estimate to be able to calculate your market share. So Redfin's the number one, I suggest, just because they have the great database. I've also heard inspectors being able to get potentially more accurate data from their local Chamber of Commerce, Association of Realtors. So yeah, any thoughts on that, Kevin?
Yeah, it's going to take a little work on your guys' part. If you have a realtor buddy, a friend, someone that trusts you, you trust them, getting that access to have them just pull numbers for you every month on the number of homes that went from for sale to pending, that's a fairly accurate measure to say, okay, 100 homes went from for sale, flipped to pending, meaning they probably are going to get an inspection within 3 days or so. And then to Olivia's point, 95% of homes that go under contract get a home inspection. So if you want to be very specific, you can multiply 100 times 0.95, which means there was 95 inspections that probably happened that month. How many of them did you get?
Totally. Yeah, and I think all you need to do to track this is like have your data and then just track it in a spreadsheet. Doesn't need to be any fancier than that, but it is really important to track because you get to understand your position in the market, which is, I think, really cool, especially if that's something, if you're trying to grow, if you're trying to increase your market share, like how many of the total inspections do you have of your total market? That's a really cool number to see and just be aware of. And then I was thinking about this the other day. Like, this data is so important because as the industry consolidates a little, people are thinking about acquisition and the value of their business. If you're able to distill, like, okay, how valuable is your company? How much of the market share do you actually have? What's the power of your inspection company? Like, that's super important to know. And then lastly, I think like competitive analysis, being able to know, okay, like, yeah, I have, this much of the pie. If you can figure out about how many other inspectors there are in your market, give or take, you know how competitive you are around how many inspections you're doing relative to counterparts. Do you have anything to say here on market share? I know in that podcast episode, you and Aaron talked about it a lot and it being a very important metric.
I want to give an example of how and why this is so important. So about 2 years ago, everyone probably remembers the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates to curb inflation. So they started inching up interest rates, which increased mortgage rates, right? That caused a big shutdown or freezing of the real estate market. So the number of transactions went down 2 years ago pretty sharply. We were at 5.5 to 6 million homes being sold run rate. That means in the next 12 months, down to like 4 million is where we're at now. So when that happened, so many companies were shocked because they stopped getting jobs and they realized that their market share was not what they thought it was because the overall market was expanding. So back 3-4 years ago, everyone was getting tons of inspections. So everyone was doing great. But the companies that were gaining market share understood that when the transaction volume went down because they realized they had 3, 4, 5% market share and they could survive in any market. So the whole point of the market share exercise is to give you a true glimpse into, are you outperforming the market? Are you underperforming the market? Because it's going to become really important next year when interest rates start to tick down again, transaction volume might inch up. You want to be not just growing with the market, you want to be outperforming relative to the market. So it gives you a realistic glimpse into how you're performing. So I can't hammer that home enough.
Yeah, thank you for phrasing it like that and for that anecdote, because I always think, like, when we're talking about numbers, it's really hard to actually feel what the impact is without an example like that. So that was really well said, and I appreciate that.
And it's the whole like rising tide lifts all boats. It's like you don't know if you're succeeding because the market's just good,
Yeah,
as opposed to like, wow, I'm out there meeting agents and I'm winning against my competition. That's what we want to see from you guys.
absolutely. And it's also like, it's such a good, if your market share is lower, if you aren't keeping pace with your local market, like, that's such a good opportunity to know that you need to improve something, right? Like, that's great indication. You need to maybe form more agent relationships. You need to look at the value you're bringing to the inspection. Like, that is such a good direct comparison to everyone else doing exactly what you do. And it's such a great opportunity to identify ways that you can get better. Wonderful. All right, and then the last metric we're going to talk about today is like lead or referral sources. So essentially, this is like the origins of your inspection lead. So how did a client booking a home inspection actually find you? So for example, like, do you know if they found you from their realtor? Did they find you from a Google search? If they found you from a realtor, which realtor was that? This is so huge in just helping you identify which marketing channels are working best for you, which are really worth your investment if you track this over a long time and can see trends in your lead or referral sources. And then like, where can you maybe improve? So I think this is a really cool one and an important one. So in Spectora, you actually can see your referral source, but I think it's like sometimes people don't fill that out. My favorite way I've heard inspectors tracking this is literally just like asking every client, you know, hey, while I have you here, how'd you find Olivia's inspection company? So I just put first step on there, like asking clients how they heard about you using the referral sources tab in Spectora. And then you can also, for digital traffic, use tools like Google Analytics, or if you have a Google business profile, which I hope each one of you does, there are analytics in there where you can see, you know, how many people are clicking on your Google business profile, how many people are pushing that call button. So none of these will give you like a perfect metric, but it's so important to understand how people are coming to your business and using that to make sure you're doing the best marketing you can. So do you want to talk just a little bit about why it's so important to know? Because on my side, like I hear inspectors who are like, oh, I get, you know, 80% of my business from my Google business profile because I really invested in local SEO. I have a ton of reviews online and like I'm capturing a ton of the people who are just like Googling home inspector near me. Then I have other home inspectors who get like all of their business just directly from realtors and don't see much in the way of their online traffic or people finding them digitally because they haven't invested. So I just think it's like such important insight to know.
I want everyone to get very maniacal about this, even from day one, day zero. So if you're brand new, this is the most dialed in intel you can get of how people are finding you. But here's where most inspectors make a mistake. They will just ask and kind of think they can mentally log it. So I would love for everyone to not only have that use that referral field and the metric that's already in Spectora, but if you create a custom field, even for your own internal tracking of anecdotally, when you ask a client or agent, how did you find me? You're going to get an answer. And there's one more question I think everyone needs to ask, because when someone says, oh, I Googled you, if a client says I Googled you, they could have searched for you on their own, typing in home inspector Seattle. Okay, so that's SEO, that they found you because of your web presence and positioning. Or the agent could have said, hey, Google Olivia Inspections Company, they're great, check them out. That's kind of an agent referral. So very different. And so I think if you know how to ask, well, what did you search? Do you remember? That's an okay question to ask, I think, because it gives you specifics. And so just know when an agent or client says that, ask them what they searched.
Yeah, that's such a great point because one of the reasons a lot of companies hate doing like what we call self-attributed like referral source or lead sources, whatever, is because people will put something like, oh, Google, and it's like Google can mean five different things. So I think it is so important to like drill down. Also, if anyone is like paying for ads, be especially sure you're tracking this, seeing how many people are finding you from your ads, and then calculating the return on investment from those ads. Anywhere you're spending your money or your time, really, which could be, you know, spending a lot of money on ads or just spending an hour of your time, and, you know, your time is valuable at an open house, it's important to know the worth of that for you, right? So that really gets into the impact of this. And we started already touching on this, but like you can use this data to essentially grow. If you see one channel is working really well for you, you can either commit to that channel, or I think the other side, the way I love seeing companies interpret this, is if they see, oh, I get 80% of my business from this one channel, that might be time to invest in some other channels too, because, you know, it's always good to have diversity in your client acquisition strategy, really, i.e. just like how people actually find your business. And so it's really important, like keeping tabs on this, especially as you're going after like new marketing ventures. So let's say, for example, you're just starting to try ads or something, or you just spent, however many dollars a month on SEO work. Tracking that over like the year, not, month to month, because some of this stuff takes a long time to work, but really seeing the long-term results of this will give you so much valuable data to know where spend is worth it, where it might be not, where you can pull back, where you can increase spend. Yeah, it's just like one of the most valuable things I think you can track as a home inspector if you have your own business.
Yep. And in practice, it'll look like, okay, I'm at the end of year one. I did 50 inspections this year. I have $3,000 to reinvest in my business for year two. What do I do with it? And if you can't answer that question, that's the purpose of all of this, is to say, okay, I got about 60 to 70% of my jobs after I did agent presentations and bought lunch and did a little slide deck. Okay, I'm gonna invest about $2,000 into that. And then I'm gonna put $1,000 maybe into digital or SEO because other people found me through searching Home Inspector Seattle or whatever. Um, so that's kind of how those decisions end up happening. And trust me, I've probably lit a good amount of money on fire in the early days of Spector just because I didn't know, and so we were just guessing.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have been guessing, that's not to say. I think that's how a lot of businesses kind of start out, because it's all new to you, right? Unless you're really well versed and seasoned in owning and running a business, it's just like kind of can be throwing shit at the wall sometimes, and that is okay. But it's so much better to understand when you can, especially when it's relatively simple to track things like this. I just think like the power of numbers is so cool. So that's, would love to hear questions, thoughts, any comments or suggestions if we have any veteran inspectors in here. But I just want to say, like, as we end this, the important part of this is tying this all together. So seeing, okay, your number of inspections, your revenue per inspection, the lead sources for all of those inspections, and your market share, and putting those together, that's when you get the really great bird's eye view of like how your business is doing over time. And I just think being able to see that and track that by implementing like these simple practices of just doing your numbers at the end of every month is so cool and so huge. And that's where we really see like successful businesses grow, is when they really know that and use all of that data to make really informed decisions. Do you
Oh,
have any last words, Kevin, before we dive into Patrick's question?
yeah. If any of you are overwhelmed with the thought of like, hey, all of central Minnesota or central California for market share, of course, the numbers are going to look puny and could feel demoralizing. I would recommend zooming in even further. So if you're in a certain suburb, so I live in a suburb about 100,000 people. So if I were a new inspector, I would look at my local market share within Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and base it on that. Because you can zoom in when you're on Zillow or Redfin or even in the MLS, you can really zoom in by zip code and neighborhood. Then you're talking, okay, I just want to get 5 next month. I just want to get 5 out of the 50 that happened. Then your activities will start to follow that goal.
Totally. And that's a great point. And that's where like, yeah, get really local with it. And when you're calculating market share specifically, make sure you're only calculating that for markets you actually serve. Like if you're doing that for the whole state or a huge city like Denver or Boston, and you're serving one small part of it, that is probably going to give you a rough idea that might make you feel a little bad. So when you're looking at your market share, make sure you're only taking into account inspections you actually might have realistically had a chance of getting. Wonderful. Seeing a question from Patrick. So seeing if you heard what's better, what you would recommend over the other, Google ads or Facebook ads. Any thought on that?
Of course, you guys are going to hate this. It depends. So I've seen the very large companies do better with big, broad ads and ad campaigns when they are putting a lot of money spent towards it, trying to blanket an area, and they have their processes down and they have their tracking down with Google ads, because that's just the average person that's jumping on and saying, hey, I need a home inspector in Austin, Texas. Um, if you're smaller, I think it tends to need to be more personalized for agents. I wouldn't do it for clients, to be honest, early on, because I have not seen evidence that tells me home buyers are in large part directly searching for a home inspector on Facebook or Instagram, clicking through and booking. It can happen, sure. Occasionally it happens, but I think to build relationships and get brand visibility, just to get impressions just to get people to see your business. You could try Facebook and Instagram and target realtors. But you need to, there's a lot more to this, Olivia. We can probably do a whole nother session on this of like what the ads should be saying. What do they do once they click or tap? How do you follow up with them? Things like that. But it's usually not for direct conversion.
Totally. And I think I'm going to get into some marketing speak, but it's like important. So we talk about funnels in marketing, or you top of funnel, or essentially very much newer in your search, not quite close to the decision of buying. So what I've seen be really successful is home inspectors, not necessarily advertising on Facebook or Google, but making sure they have a presence there. So, you know, you have the chance of coming up and someone who's about to buy a home or looking at buying a home, coming up in their algorithm, they'll recognize your name. And then I hear of so many more inspectors advertising on Google, which is where, typically speaking, a home buyer might go when they're actually ready to book an inspection. So I hope that wasn't too marketing jargon-y, but I think it's important.
Yep.
Cool. I'm also seeing evergreen property inspection. Shared the wrong one. Evergreen property inspections. I have lost the habit of tracking metrics, and I know that's the only way I can grow. Yeah, it is a habit. Like, I think I just want to share what I do because it can be really hard. You know, you get busy and you forget to do it, and then you put it off, and then suddenly it's been like 4 months and you're like, man, haven't looked at that in forever. First of all, a lot of the time you can go and like backfill data if you want to look and see how it's been over the year. But the second thing is I just like put a reminder in my calendar on the first of every month and just set aside like that hour and a half to look at all my metrics and not just track them, but look at how it looks versus the month before, the year before, and actually understand and like think about what I have done that month and how it has been working for me. And just by like having a dedicated hour for that, I found that it makes the habit pretty easy to keep. So that's my tip. I don't know if you have anything else to add there, but it is exactly that, just a habit.
Yeah, calendar event. We could get creative with our new community in HQ. I think there's going to be rooms and spaces where people want to compare metrics and chat about it and just kind of have like that locker room talk around where people are at. And if it happens on a certain day of the month, you know, you can treat yourself like you're an accountant and say like by the 5th of the month, I'm going to need to talk about this data and metrics with my group or with my pod or with you know, my Spector friends. Then you'll be ready. You'll get them done.
Totally. And there are places like the Say Hello space in the HQ or any space like that, where you can go in and share that right now if you're wanting to see how other people's markets are, compare any of this data. I know I like nerding out to data with people, so if you do too, definitely head over to the HQ and get that conversation started. Asking, do we have a specialist on our team or someone that could help with Google Ads and helping with other platforms like Bing too? So we don't have anyone that specializes in ads at Spectora. Any recommendations for this, Kevin?
Yeah, we can probably direct you to some resources, Brandon, that could help if you want to sell. I know you're sharp. I know you well, and you may go at this on your own. We have people that have worked with ads, that have ran them, that could maybe give you a couple like of the obvious landmines of what not to do to burn a bunch of budget. And then we can also link you up with some of the lighter agencies. There's some agencies that don't cost an arm and a leg that can get you started. Shoot us an email. I'll have a few links for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. And we're always like, advertising is not my particular specialty. So I feel like if I'm always hesitant to like answer questions, especially because that is something that you spend on and it's like a big deal. But I think we have experts like Kevin, people who have done this before on the Spectora team who would at least be willing to talk it through with you a bit. So yeah, as Kevin said, feel free to get in touch.
And for others following along and listening, like ads are tough. And I think Brandon's been in the business a long time. They have a good sized company. And so the tracking on these has to be so dialed in and you have to be so specific with what you're after. So just a PSA almost of like, instead of going and shaking hands, pounding the pavement, hitting open houses, I always go towards the human side for newer inspectors.
Seeing here from Patrick Crooks, any insight on HubSpot tracking email opens when cold emailing realtors or sending out monthly newsletters? Not sure if any of that's worth doing or setting up. if you're talking about sending out monthly newsletters and cold emailing realtors, I'm just going to say yes and yes. It's worthy of doing and setting up. If you are doing it, you should track it. We actually have, if you go over to the HQ and go to this space that says Growth Hub, I can actually send a link to it right now. We have a couple webinars we've done specifically on email marketing, what to track, how you can see it. And I think that would be a super useful place to start. I don't know specifically about using HubSpot. Well, I mean, I do. We use HubSpot, but I don't know if that's like too big of a tool, if that's what you're asking, like getting started. But definitely newsletters and marketing emails are so worth it. And definitely tracking like email opens, especially with a cold email that's not a newsletter of someone who's already in your network. It is, look at some like industry averages. I think it's really low for the open rate for like a cold email, and don't get discouraged by that, because really all you need are like, 5 replies, 10 replies, however many agents you're trying to work with. I don't know if I phrased that as well as I could have, but basically, yeah, keep track and make sure you're not overwhelmed and saying like, oh, I'm going to quit this because only, 10% open my email. Like, I think it's like 15 to 25 is industry average or something like that.
Yeah, I'm biased too, Patrick. I love HubSpot. I think it's a great tool. It tracks clicks, opens, where they're clicking in the email. There's a lot of lightweight tools out there that I think have a freemium model where it's going to be free if you have under a certain number of contacts or a certain number of email sends. So hopefully everyone can find something like that out there, like a HubSpot or a Zoho. Because yeah, tracking clicks and opens, very important. Because if you're just flying blind, it's tough to know who to follow up with. Because if you get some opens from cold emails, that might be worth a phone call. That might be worth further engagement.
Totally. And Patrick, I just included the link to the Growth Hub in the Spector HQ. And if you go in there, you'll actually see there are a couple lessons on email marketing, and specifically email marketing for realtors. We actually have like downloadable templates that you can use for those cold emails if you just need a place to get started. So highly recommend checking that out, all in the Growth Hub. Wonderful. I think with that, not seeing any other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all for coming and tuning in to what is a really important, but albeit can feel boring topic. It really great questions from everyone, and it just makes putting on office hours like these, Kevin's office hours, so much fun. So thank you all.
Last comment, last thing I'll say, guys, ask these questions to your peers. Have the conversations. I think for our industry to grow in sophistication and kind of how we do things, keep asking each other your revenue per inspection, number of inspections. I want to normalize it because it's how we grow. It's how you know where you're at. So continue to have those conversations.
Totally. Thank you all.